So originally I thought this video was going to be out a few weeks ago, but I really underestimated just how long it was going to take to make. So essentially... Yo, what's up guys, this is Tristan, and today I'm going to be counting down every single One Piece arc from my least favorite to my number one favorite. Let's get into it. Coming in at 25th place is the Foxy arc, also known as Long Ring, Long Land, and obviously it's at the bottom of my list, so it's my least favorite one, and it's definitely not a horrible arc. I think that if it was a chapter or two, it could probably be pretty good, but it was way too long, and I think that even Afro Luffy couldn't make up for that, so yeah, it's at the bottom of the list at 25th place. Coming in at 24th place is Whiskey Peak, and at 23rd is the Reverse Mountain arc. And I'm kind of gonna combine these two just because I don't really remember much about them. I remember that they were the early arcs in Alabasta in the Baroque saga, but I don't really remember much about them. I kind of remember the general concepts of each arc. But yeah, they weren't too memorable. I barely even remember much about them when I was looking up stuff about it. So yeah, 24th and 23rd place for these two. So coming in at 22nd place is actually Fishman Island. And as you may remember, I talked about this in my video called The Problem with New World One Piece, in addition to a bunch of the other New World arcs. And to me, this is probably the most disappointing arc in the series, and I think a lot of that is due to the themes being so great, but the arc itself not being all that good. The topics about racial discrimination with the fishmen and the themes relating to the 1960s civil rights movement are really well done, but they're just kind of clouded by the pacing and the other stuff going on. Again, I talked more about it in that video I made, but overall, I think this arc is kind of a letdown, and even though it's cool to see some of their powers after coming back from the time skip, it definitely isn't one of my favorites, and it's definitely scraping the bottom of the barrel for me. And even though I think the stuff leading up to the island was cool once they actually got there, it did get super slow, and I kind of lost interest, and it was kind of a drag to get through. So it's kind of hard to put it much higher than 22nd place. So 21st place is Romance Dawn. This is the first arc in the series, and there's not really anything bad about this arc. It's just not as good as the stuff above it, and it's pretty understandable because it's the first arc, and it's obviously expected to get mostly better after that. But yeah, there's a lot of classic stuff here, you know, Zoro meeting Luffy for the first time, you know, all the Kobe stuff. It's pretty great. I read the first volume of the series a while ago, and I pretty much remember most of the stuff about it. So coming in at 20th place is Orangetown. This is the second arc in One Piece. It's the introduction of Nami, and it's mostly about Buggy and his crew. It's a fun arc. I don't remember a ton about it, but yeah, it's some fun stuff there. Moving on, 19th place is the Amazon Lily arc. This is the one where Luffy goes with Bo Hancock and that crew. And it's a pretty funny arc, there's some good humor. I might be wrong about this, but I'm pretty sure this arc takes place right after Paramount War. And just the break of all that dark stuff for this nice fun arc with some cool characters. It's nothing amazing, but it's definitely kind of a nice break in things. So 18th place is Loguetown, and this is actually a really nice way to cap off the East Blue Saga. I think that this is really where things start to get more expansive with One Piece. And I think this might be the one where Zoro and Mihawk fight for the first time. I'm not completely sure about that one, but overall, yeah, this is a pretty good arc. So coming in at 17th place is Punk Hazard. And I think Punk Hazard is a pretty decent arc. I think that Caesar is a pretty good villain. I really like how he's continued into some of the later arcs. I think that the concept of an island being half on fire and half frozen is super interesting, and also I think that the themes of the children of Punk Hazard being experimented on is really well done, but this arc shares the same problem with a lot of other New World arcs where it just feels too slow at times, and even though it's not too bad in that area, and even though it's not super long, I feel like it could have been a little shorter and more tight in it. Overall though, I think this was a pretty good arc to start the New World off. So coming in at 16th place is Little Garden, and this is basically the arc where the two giants are introduced, and it's a big Usopp arc, and it's not really anything too big or too crazy. It's in the Baroque saga, but overall it's mainly just a fun, lighthearted One Piece arc. And I feel like if someone wanted to get introduced to One Piece for the first time, this wouldn't be a bad arc to do that because it's pretty short and it kind of gives a good summary of what the series is about and what it's like. Even though this arc was pretty small though, it really teased Elbaf and how that was going to play a big role in the story, and especially with Usopp. and it ended up really connecting to Big Mom's backstory in Whole Cake Island, and even though this was nothing too big or too crazy, it was just a really good arc. So coming in at 15th place is Zoe. Now this arc, it's pretty much just a transition arc in my opinion, but it does introduce a lot of amazing things. I mean, it introduces the Minx, it introduces Carrot, and I really hope Carrot eventually becomes a Straw Hat. I know a lot of people aren't too big on that character, but I'm a fan. I hope that she gets a backstory at some point though, but overall I think she's a pretty decent character. I think that this arc does an amazing job though at setting up a time frame for the end of the series, because it introduces the road poneglyphs, which is gonna kind of lead into the final arcs, and definitely it gives Robin a purpose in the end of the series, because she's been pretty relevant in New World so far, and hopefully she gets some great moments with that, because I think there's a lot of potential there. And also, I think this goes without saying, but I think the concept of a giant elephant who's pretty much his own island is extremely interesting. And also, I think the Minx are a pretty interesting species, and I'm glad they were introduced into the series. So, 14th place is Sierra Village. This is the Usopp introduction arc. And at 13th place is Drum Island. This is the Chopper introduction arc. And overall, I don't really have a ton of stuff to say about these two arcs, except they're just pretty great intro arcs. They do a good job at introducing the characters, and they set up a pretty good backstory. There's not really a ton to go into here, but yeah, they're pretty fine arcs. Coming in at 12th place is Skypiea, and Skypiea to me is kind of a mixed bag. I think it's really good overall. It's definitely one of the first arcs in the series where it really gets big. But overall, it is kind of mixed. Like I said, I think the beginning is pretty great, and then there's a lot of stuff with the henchmen that I really just don't care about all that much. And I know some people really like that stuff, but to me it just didn't hit. But the big finale where the Straw Hat crew faces off against Enel or Eneru, however you like to say it, they face off against him, and it's probably one of the best final fights in the entire series, because it's some great stuff, and I think they really used their powers to the fullest there. I know in some of the later arcs, they kind of relied too much on Luffy, and they don't always use the rest of the Straw Hat crew to their advantage, but I feel like in this arc, all their powers matter in the final outcome. I know a lot of people like to hate on Skypiea and say that it isn't that good, and even though I don't think it's a great arc, I definitely think that it's a pretty solid arc, and even though it could have been better, you know, I think for what it is, it does a pretty good job, but overall, it's at 12th place. So coming in at 11th place is Thriller Bark, and to me this is definitely the most underrated one in the entire series. I know a lot of people consider it one of the worst arcs in One Piece, but to me it's actually a really decent arc, and I think Gecko Moria is probably one of my favorite villains in the entire series. I think all the stuff with Hor Luffy, or whatever it's called, I think that mode of his is pretty interesting. The stuff with, you know, the big monster guy, I kind of forget what his name is too. I mean, it's been kind of a while since I read it, but I still remember a lot of stuff from this. Overall, I really like Thriller Bark, and I think it gets more hate than it deserves. I think the introduction of Brook is really well done. His backstory is probably one of my favorites, even though all the backstories of the Straw Hat crew members are really good. The story about all of Brooks' crew coming together and singing that one last song before they died, that was a really great moment in One Piece. And I think this arc has some of my favorite Zoro moments in pre-time skip One Piece. I know that might be kind of a hot take, but yeah, I'm still sticking by that. I might be kind of biased on this one because Halloween might be my favorite holiday of the year, and you know, all that spooky October stuff is just really interesting to me and really fun. So to me, I love that stuff about Thriller Bark, but I can see why people wouldn't like it. But overall, Thriller Bark at 11th place. So kicking off the top 10 is Arlong Park, and I know a lot of people consider this the best arc in East Blue, and to me, I mean, there's one more arc in East Blue that I think is better, but this is still a great arc, and a lot of people consider it the point where One Piece got good, and still, I mean, I think One Piece was good from the very first chapter, but this is where One Piece really cranked it up a notch. I think a lot of the content before Arlong Park was really just fun and goofy. Even though I love that stuff about One Piece, I think a lot of the more serious stuff adds a lot of depth to the characters, and Arlong Park is really the first one to really dive into that. So coming in at 9th place is Jaya, and this one's pretty good. This is the one that comes before Skypiea. This is basically a transition arc into that. It also gets into some really interesting stuff with the island of Jaya, and it's a really good setup for Skypiea. I think the one guy with the Boston cream donut on his head, or the chestnut, I kind of forget his name, but he was a pretty good character. And overall, I think this is the one where Bellamy gets introduced. Some great stuff here, not too much to say about it. I'm just going to leave it at that. So coming in at 8th place is Dressrosa. And this one for me is one that I have some really mixed opinions on, because overall I think it's a good arc. I think the first half is pretty great. The tournament stuff, all the gladiator stuff, it was great. I really like that. I didn't have a problem there. I think the stuff with certain character coming back, that was handled really well. And overall, I think that Dressrosa has one of the best starts to any One Piece arc ever. But where it really falls flat for me is the second half. I think the pacing in the second half gets super slow, and it was a real drag to get through in the second half. I talked about a lot of the complaints I have with this arc in a video I made called The Problem with New World One Piece. And even though I don't stand by all the points I made in that video, and even though after thinking about this arc for a while, I do like it a lot better than I used to, I think the fight with Kairos versus Diamante is one of the best fights in the series, even though it doesn't have any Straw Hat members involved. And I do think the Gear 4th stuff in the Luffy versus Doflamingo final fight was pretty good, even though it could have been a little bit shorter. Also, I think that Doflamingo could have been handled better in certain areas, but overall, Dressrosa, 8th place. Place is Sabaody. This is definitely more of a transition arc than anything. It's nothing too humongous, but overall it sets up a lot of really interesting storylines. I think the big thing about this arc, though, is that it sets up the whole Paramount War saga, and definitely this is the first arc where the Straw Hats really take their first major L. I mean, they face off against Bartholomew Kuma, and man, they just get destroyed, but it makes them even stronger in the long run, and overall it sets up a lot of really interesting plot threads to go off of. So coming in at 6th place is Baratie. This is the Sanji introduction arc in East Blue, and it's by far my favorite East Blue arc. It's some really solid stuff. I mean, the villain isn't anything too memorable. I mean, I really barely remember who he was, but that's not really the point. I think, you know, everything about how Sanji came to be who he is, really interesting. The stuff with him on the rocks, stranded alone with owner Zeph. That's some great stuff. Definitely one of my favorite backstories in the series. I think later in the series, New World, that's expanded upon even more. And yeah, I don't really have a ton more to say about this arc. It's just great. If you haven't read it for whatever reason, if you're just getting into One Piece, you have a lot to look forward to with this one. Pretty early in the series, and it's really fun to read. So coming in at 5th place is Impel Down. And to me, this is basically the pinnacle of comedy in One Piece. I mean, there's a lot of ups and downs with One Piece, and the comedy, to me, is usually pretty good. I feel like the comedy is usually very reflective of the arc. And Impel Down, I think in light of all the serious stuff with Sabaody, and of course Paramount War, all that stuff, I think Impel Down was just a really nice breath of fresh air, and it didn't dismiss all that serious stuff. It definitely still had a lot of serious stuff with, well, characters getting poisoned and whatnot. I'm just gonna leave it at that. But the comedy with Bon Clay and Buggy, top-notch stuff there. I think the mystery about what's gonna be worse with Impel Down the farther they go down into the prison, that's just incredible. I think the one poison villain, he wasn't my favorite. I honestly think he was one of my least favorite villains in the entire series. But overall, I think that the villains in One Piece overall don't really matter. I think that the villains in One Piece overall aren't my favorite manga villains. But overall, I mean, Impel Down really hits the nail on the head with what a One Piece arc should be. Yeah, Impel Down, great stuff, 5th place. So coming in at 4th place is Marineford / Paramount War / Summit War. While I was ranking every arc in the series, I originally put this at 2nd place because, you know, everyone likes Marineford. A lot of people say it's either the best or 2nd best arc in the series. Even though I really like Marineford, I don't think I like it as much as a lot of other people do, and I definitely like it a lot. It's in 4th place out of like 29 or so arcs. I kind of forget how much I said, but anyways, out of that many arcs, it's in 4th place. That's really good. But I think there are 3 other arcs that I just like significantly more, and a lot of my favorite parts about One Piece are the interactions with the other crew, and especially since Sanji is my all-time favorite crew member and he wasn't in this arc, that was kind of a letdown for me, and this is definitely more of a Luffy-focused arc, even though it's still great. Nonetheless, though, I mean, Marineford is still a very good arc. I mean, it really shows the consequences of what Luffy got himself into with becoming a pirate. Definitely shows that there is definitely a dark side and a lot of negativity that comes with being a pirate, and even though Luffy wants to become the Pirate King, he definitely still has to take on a lot, and a lot of burdens are being placed on his shoulders for all this stuff, and Marineford is basically the perfect example of that. I think Aokiji, Akainu, and even Kizaru to some extent are some really great antagonists from the series, and even though I want to see a lot more of especially Aokiji and even Akainu, I think that this arc is a very good tease of what they could be in the future of One Piece. There were also two very significant deaths in One Piece, and even though to me I kind of already knew those deaths before I even got into One Piece because of how many people were talking about the series, I did still think that they were pretty impactful, and even though I wasn't bawling my eyes out over that like some other people were, just because, you know, I've seen that like millions of times before I even got into the arc, I did think it was pretty well done. And I know some people consider Volume 59 the best volume in the entire series, and I don't really agree with that. I think that Volume 60, the one that's about the Ace and Sabo backstory, that one I think is a lot better to me. But overall, I mean, it is what it is. Great arc. Marineford at 4th place. So coming in at 3rd place is Alabasta. Now, Alabasta is probably one of the first big arcs that comes in. A lot of the arcs before this are pretty small, and even though Alabasta itself isn't really an enormous arc, it mainly feels big because of all the stuff leading up to it. I mean, there were so many small arcs in the Baroque Works saga that hyped up Crocodile, that hyped up all the smaller villains like Bon Clay, Mr. One, all the number of villains. They come in, you know, Nico Robin is introduced in the Baroque Works saga. She really shines a little bit in this arc. And overall, I mean, Alabasta is just such a One Piece classic. I don't really have as many opinions on this arc as I do with some of the other stuff, just because it's been so long since I read it. But it definitely is a very, very good arc. I mean, Crocodile is such a great villain, and I'm usually not really a huge fan of One Piece villains, like I said, but Crocodile really hits the nail on the head with what a One Piece villain should be. And if you were kind of iffy about how the villains were early on, I think you're really going to be impressed with Crocodile, and I think it's really cool how they use their powers to the fullest in this arc, and the fact that Crocodile is made of sand makes for some really interesting feats with Luffy. And I think it's cool that Luffy was really struggling to be Crocodile, and you could really tell that he was putting all into his fight, and it made for a lot of suspense as to how he's going to get himself out of that situation. So coming in at 2nd place is actually Whole Cake Island. And this may come as a surprise to some people, just because, you know, reading it week to week, a lot of people weren't huge fans of it, but I feel like a lot of people who read it all together really like the arc, and that's what I did, because as I was catching up to One Piece, this arc already finished. So I pretty much read this whole arc in a short time period, and it was really enjoyable. I know a lot of people were complaining that Whole Cake Island basically felt like a modern version of Enies Lobby. That's honestly kind of what I liked about it, because the whole thing about, you know, Luffy getting into the argument with Sanji, it's kind of a parallel to when Usopp and Luffy kind of broke up with the crew. And that was a really interesting dynamic. I think it was a good parallel, even though it's kind of just using Enies Lobby as the structure for this arc. I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing, just because I really like Enies Lobby. So this to me was a pretty great arc, and it's definitely the best New World arc so far. I think the extended Sanji backstory was one of my favorite moments in all of New World One Piece, and the stuff about, you know, Sanji and Pudding and finding out the big secret there, that's definitely top 10 One Piece moments for me. That's some big hitter stuff there. And Whole Cake Island really added a lot of depth to Sanji's character, which is pretty impressive, because Sanji is already my favorite character before this, and after he sacrificed himself to two of the biggest families and most dangerous families in One Piece for the benefit of his crew and owner Zeph, I feel like that really showed a lot about his character. I also think that Big Mom had a lot of great stuff in this arc, and also Carrot had some pretty great stuff, even though I know a lot of people aren't big fans of that character. I can see why some people didn't like this arc, just because the conclusion was a little bit dragged out in some parts, but to me, I didn't really mind just because I was enjoying the arc so much. And I feel like a lot of people who read this arc back-to-back weekly would probably enjoy it a lot more if they went back and reread the whole thing. And obviously, I'm not saying everyone should do that, because it's a pretty big arc. But yeah, this is a great arc, and it's my second favorite One Piece arc. So coming in at 1st place is none other than Water 7 / Enies Lobby. And I'm pretty sure most people just consider these two the same arc, just because Water 7, the first half, which is more Frankie-centric, and the second half is Enies Lobby, which is more Robin-centric. And overall, this is just an incredible arc, and it's undoubtedly the pinnacle of One Piece. All the stuff with Usopp as Sniper King and the falling out with him and Luffy. There's a lot of stuff I could say about Enies Lobby / Water 7, but if you're currently reading One Piece and you haven't read this arc yet, then you have a lot to look forward to, because it's easily the best arc in the entire series, and that's definitely saying a lot, because there are a lot of great arcs in One Piece. So that's pretty much it for this video, guys. If you enjoyed, make sure to slap the like button, subscribe, and drop a comment letting me know your favorite One Piece arcs, whether that's top 5, top 10,
whatever it may be, let me know in the comments, and I will see you guys in the next video.